Welcome to episode 128 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics typically in about 20 minutes, but today we're doing our standalone episode, and Anshel and I would like to welcome Ingmārs Pūķis. He's the Vice President and Board Member of LMT Latvia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Will. Hello, Anshel.
Great. Well, let's get going. So, Ingmārs, it'd be great for you to provide an overview of what you do at LMT, and then maybe for our viewers and listeners, talk a little bit about LMT and its presence in Latvia.
So, hello. Yes, I'm coming from Latvia, so the Baltic states, northern part of the Europe. So we've been, I've been in the telco industry for more than 20 years. So, but LMT as a company has been a historical operator here for 30 years. So we are jointly owned by both Telia and Latvian governments. So we have kind of a yin-yang situation here. So and we have been mobile only. So we have been kind of pretty much focused on mobile industry all these 30 years without any distractions toward the fixed line. And we have been for last, I don't know, let's say 10 years, we have been quite also focused on building wireless broadband. With the help of the 4G technologies. I think we've done our homework quite decently since our mobile, both our networks and our competitors' networks these days are competing with fixed line operators here, and so we are now over the last 5 years we have been trying to build our skills to update and get ready for the 5G, because we do believe that 5G should not be only about the broadband, so we should get something more out of it, at least some part of the stuff that's been promised that will happen in 10 years. Some of this should maybe happen, I don't know, next year or in 2 or 3 years. So, but as we have noticed, that asks for a completely new set of skills that we normally do not have, because being a mobile operator means that you are very good at retail. You know, you are building a retail network and sell retail products. A 5G means industrial product. A normal mobile operator doesn't have those, you know, HR capital to actually deliver on those. So that's what we have been doing over the 5 years now, getting ready for 5G when it will show up eventually. So yeah.
Well, you know, and 5G is a journey. It's not a light switch, and I've used that phrase many times with journalists when I speak with them. And I think in the European Union, there are additional challenges because the close proximity of all the countries, as well as the need, to manage, individual spectrum auctions and deployments and that sort of thing. So it's been a little bit slower in deployment in Europe, but I think, Europe has certain challenges. But, I've gotten to know you and LMT through the 5G Techritory event. That event, it just held its 5th event this year. I was in Latvia for that. I'm glad I missed the snow. I understand it snowed after I left, but I've been really impressed with that event. I've attended both in person, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, supported that, here in Texas where I live, and then I was able to get back to Riga this year. And I continue to be really impressed with what the event is doing to advance 5G use cases. And as you mentioned, 5G is really going to be about industrial use cases, given the low latency, the extremely fast throughput, the massive device support, the additional security encryption that comes along with 5G over LTE. I wrote a Forbes article. I just checked, and it got several thousand views. So I guess I did a good job there. And I spoke about the panels that I participated in with respect to the debate around OTT regulation and accessibility. But for our viewers and listeners, if you didn't see that, that's posted to my Twitter channel as well as my LinkedIn channel. But Ingmārs, I'd love to get your perspective on what you felt were some of kind of the most impressive happenings that came out of the event this year.
Well, we as a company, we have been supporting the Techritory since the very beginning. The original idea was exactly that to understand what are you going to do with the 5G, you should come together, was one thing. And the other thing was this claim that here in the northern part of the Europe, there are a great number of little nice countries like Baltics and Nordics, and everybody is doing just fine with digital services and networks, but there is like kind of no one common voice. So this ambition was to have some kind of gathering where we could actually come together and share and discuss and have some common voice, because Europe is quite, it's quite fragmented. So there are really different scenarios happening. We do not really feel any problematic here with the amount of or speed of rollout of mobile services. Actually, our customers are between top users on the planet now, and we're quite happy. And our regulators locally here, at least, have been quite generous with frequencies. So we are quite content. But the big question is more or less coming on this next level. What do you build upon these cool 4G, 5G services? That's exactly why we have this Techritory thing for policymakers and operators and enterprise level to come together and actually share some experience. For us, this year, probably some of the pinnacles was a little bit, maybe for the first time, it was actually a little bit more local. The good experience was that actually we were able to come together locally, many industries, and to sign a memorandum regarding the buildup of skills regarding chips, kind of in reflection to Chips Act happening in the EU, because historically we have a kind of 150 years of industrial and engineering production here, but somehow we have also lost a lot of part of the historical abilities we had around chips. So there's a big movement both from the policy makers and industry here in Latvia that we should make some steps in education and so, I mean, the ecosystem thing is probably most important for us right now. And that's probably the most important thing from this year, that over the years we have been able to build a local ecosystem that's quite strong and actually much more speedy than probably in other countries, which are like just bigger. So we can do stuff, we can do stuff faster.
It's interesting from my perspective to see the event grow from, to your point, being a very sort of Baltic central, event to much broader and bringing in, more parts of Europe and even globally as well. And all of the major infrastructure providers were there. I mean, this is the area that I cover as an analyst. I spoke to Nokia, I spoke to a number of different, infrastructure providers, and it is impressive to see just the scope of the event grow and how it's become a, sort of a real influence and really kind of risen to become a very, very large regional show. And, I think in my Forbes article, I stated that, I think finally 5G Techritory has sort of stepped out of the shadow of the bigger brother Mobile World Congress series. And I think kind of what you shared with our audience is a great segue to Anshel's first question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could kind of tell us some of the bigger 5G use cases that you're seeing arise specifically in the Baltics and how LMT is involved in some of those.
Yeah, well, back in the day, we identified one of the fundamental problem for a mobile operator is that you can't do things on your own in 5G. So normally a mobile operator is rich and he's introvert, so he doesn't need other companies, other partners. You can do everything on your own, which is not true in the 5G world. So you have to build some skill how to talk to other people and make some partnerships. So we have reached out many directions. One of the historically the oldest ones was actually defense industry, because historically the defense industry has been intentionally not smartphoneized. I mean, intentionally avoiding civilian communication technologies. What they've noticed in the many theaters around the world, that adversaries are actually very nicely using civilian technologies, cheap civilian technologies with great effect. So there's a big movement regarding the adopting the mobile technology for NATO standards and NATO use cases. And this is one of the oldest ones, starting from developing command control systems, developing private networks, looking into 5G capabilities, both for alternative to GPS positioning, usage of augmented and virtual reality. And coming back to the ecosystem I mentioned, this is probably one of our strongest ecosystems here, but we have built together with National Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defense, as well as the NATO researchers, that we launched the first 5G testbed, particularly for deploying military use cases right into the military base next to the Riga, which contains, which has the battle groups from 11 countries on the NATO. So this is a really good place to test and to develop these use cases. Particularly, what we have been doing right now is virtual reality and augmented reality, and we are looking into using 5G for positioning use case, as well as, of course, the side link as such is I think the military, in essence, when they opened up to, so to speak, civilian side of communication, I think that they will be one of the big users and big lovers of 5G technology. This is one big vertical, and of course, it's somewhat extra exposed these days because of all the horrible happenings right next door to us, because we have kind of the first row seat to all what is happening in the Russian-Ukrainian war, and all the competence and experience which is coming our way, how the communication is actually behaving in the front line. So the defense use case is one big topic. The other one is mobility. So over the years, I think it has been quite obvious that transportation systems are somewhat least digitalized systems we have, and probably role of the operator is not so much to ensure autonomous vehicles, it's more like ensure connected vehicles. So all this discussion around connectivity for future mobility has been quite high on the agenda. We have been also happy participant of many European-wide research activities. We have built a little part of Estonian, our neighbor country, our Estonian network right in the middle of the city. So we built a test track to particularly work on autonomous vehicle performance in cross-border situations and all the related aspects. So mobility is the other part. The third part is actually might seem a little bit more mundane, but it's related to, so to speak, an end user equipment, because theoretically you can have anything these days, but when you take a look from the operator's perspective, it's not so easy to actually buy stuff and bring it to your customers. In theory, you can go to some congresses, and there's an endless line of formal or theoretical suppliers, but when you do need to have something, it's not so easy. And again, we have invested in local ecosystem. We have our dear neighbor company, Microtech, which is producer of end-user radio equipment for end users and industrial users. So we have cooperated, and one of the first projects was how to become independent from Chinese produce. So we proved that it's thanks to the automation thanks to the automation levels and efficiencies, we are able to substitute Huawei routers. So now we have stepped forward, and we have produced air quality and the fire safety sensor that operates in narrowband and LTE networks that we can actually sell to our customers. So we don't need to wait some miraculous future or someday soon, but we can actually have an actual thing that actually works directly to the mobile network. And the first component is, of course, the smart city, and that's the classical use case. And again, thanks to the ecosystem, we are investing in, together with our capitals, city of Riga. We are also deploying road safety sensors, which are built on computer vision. So these are some of the cases, but these are probably just an example. They're quite diverse. They're not exactly just built around the connectivity itself, because which we quickly realized that in this topic 5G future, the connectivity is just a part sometimes very small part of the use case in general. So it's much more important to see the whole value chain, and it's not so easy to find the integrator who is going to be doing this, who is going to integrate all this beautiful stuff. Therefore, we have made our choice and actually built the skills that we might be one of the integrators. So we're trying to go quite diverse directions here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the defense use case, and Anshel and I, we've covered that on prior podcasts as well. We're seeing a lot of that within the United States. A lot of it is around transportation and logistics to supply the U.S. Marine Corps and other branches of our military in the U.S. And certainly, sort of the smart city use cases that you were speaking to as well. We're beginning to see that, companies like Qualcomm are getting into smart city very aggressively, not only providing the silicon, but also the software to enable all these different use cases. And smart city is such a broad term. You talked about, road safety and that sort of thing, but there are a number of different things that can be done there. But I found it interesting too. You talked a little bit about the Chinese infrastructure and sort of the rip and replace, and obviously that's something that's happening in the U.S. as well. And one of the focuses, at least for the U.S. government in the U.S., is trying to domesticate that 5G supply chain, and and even not have to rely solely on even the Nordic countries like the Nokias and the Ericssons of the world, although they are great partners, as well as Samsung Networks when you look at the 5G deployments in our country. But I'm wondering, we're seeing a trend in the US and other parts of the world around embracing the cloud for obvious reasons, for resiliency, for edge computing. AWS and Azure have been very aggressive in that regard. And then the whole notion of Open RAN, which can potentially domesticate the 5G supply chain, at least for the US, but also provide agility as well as virtualized RAN. And and Samsung Networks has been leading the charge from my perspective with respect to vRAN. But I'm wondering, when you look at cloudification and you look at some of this disaggregation in the RAN, are these elements that LMT is also evaluating?
Well, yes, but I mean, this comes in some packages. It doesn't come like a single wholesome product. We're clearly doing this in the core network. Now we are starting to roll out our standalone 5G network for commercial use. So clearly we are going to cloud native solution here. Regards to the radio access network, we have this in plans for, let's say, 2 or 3 years perspective, because probably there are different angles how you can look at this. I mean, for us, we are still operating 2G network, 3G network, and 4G and 5G. So they're 4 commercial networks. They are operating in a seamless manner. So we have to be quite careful regarding what we do. So we are not that focused just on the 5G. So we still have all of our kind of bread and butter comes from the 4G network. We are going to close down 3G very soon, of course, and we will redistribute the frequencies. But regarding the radio network, we are a little bit more cautious. So we are looking in 2-3 years perspective here, as well as, of course, we should consider the aspects of energy efficiency, which is quite high on the agenda these days, particularly in our region where the cost of electricity is. We very nicely realized this year that we are a big consumer, which we
right. Yeah, and 5G, one of its superpowers is power efficiency as well. I'm not surprised to hear you say that, because I recently spent time with AT&T. Their electricity bill is in the billions of US dollars, right? So this is pretty significant stuff. But I want to stay on the RAN thread here for a moment, and I think Anshel's got a question for you.
Yeah, as a follow-on to Will's question, I was wondering if the momentum in RAN sharing in other parts of the EU is finding its way into the Baltics, speed of 5G deployments, and maybe how does it reduce competitiveness, or how does it increase in other ways?
Yeah, well, that's quite an intense question by itself. We have lots of battles won and lost around this topic here. I think there are, again, many layers to this. Historically, we have been sharing a passive infrastructure for zillion of years. So in the places where it's very hard to build some tower, that's normal. It's kind of a check on Charlotte thing. You're kind of sharing your towers with competition. That nothing unusual. This has been happening for as long as I remember myself. So this is the one part. The part where we would share the active infrastructure, we actually actively oppose, because we do believe that this is cumbersome for two reasons. One reason is that we've seen that our strategies are very much different. I mean, in the years where we were investing, let's say, in the capacity, some of the competition were more investing in coverage, for instance, as a very simple example, but very telling. So where do you actually invest? So also we've seen that in our forecasts actually seem, I mean, our radio network is our product. I mean, this is what we are. I mean, that's our brand. So sharing and nibbling down these differences between networks probably lead to pure old price competition, which is probably driving down in the medium term the end users benefit. It might seem very nice and rosy at first, but it will actually drive down the competition. Third aspect is quite physical. I mean, for us, the main problem is to get the permission to build. It's not so much about the capex. It's much more about the ability to build in the places where network is needed. Because if you have, I don't know, the classical problem of low-rise buildings, and everybody wants some nice villa, but no, stupid tower hovering somewhere nearby. So therefore, in these areas, quite often the towers are, and these positions are physically overloaded just with our own infrastructure. So we therefore what we do believe in, we do, where possible, we do share physical or so to speak the passive infrastructure, but we do not venture into the sharing of active. Yeah.
Well, no, that makes sense. And, for our viewers and listeners that are, some of them are likely not as familiar with Latvia as I am. I'm still working on my key to the city. I tease the PR agency that manages the 5G Techritory event there. But, there are 3 operators, right, in Latvia, and Latvia is a fairly small country as well. And so I imagine it is quite intense. I don't think the issue is a lack of fiber. One of my understandings is that Latvia is a very fiber dense country. And obviously that supports, fixed broadband, as well as the need for backhaul for 5G. But it's an interesting market. The Baltics are becoming a technology powerhouse from my perspective. A lot of people may not know this, but I believe Skype was actually birthed in Estonia, just right next door, to Latvia as well. So Ingmārs, thank you so much for coming on our standalone podcast. I think it's been really educational to get a different view on a market that many of our viewers and listeners might not be familiar with. But with that, Anshel, I'm going to let you take it away.
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights for a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Saad. Thanks again to Ingmārs and LMT for joining us today, and happy holidays.